Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Jacqueline Stallone. Many of you may know that Jacqueline Stallone is the mother of renowned actor Sylvester Stallone. She had passed away recently, and according to reports on the internet, she died peacefully in her sleep, but there may have been some actual other cause of the death as far as due to her passing, though it may have been peacefully when she was sleeping. There may have been some other debilitation that may have contributed. Just we don't, they haven't elaborated that on the internet. At least I haven't seen it, and I guess as time progresses, they'll give more specifics on it. Now, elaborate on. Now, the thing is, I want to talk about some natal placements and transits in her chart that may have played a contributing role astrologically to this. Now, the thing about it is, first I want to talk about a little bit about her life. I understood she was an astrologer. It's interesting. She's got um, Scorpio on the second house cusp, which of course could manifest in generating income through the occult, which can include astrology. She also has Pisces on the sixth house cusp. That could be work in the metaphysical, which includes astrology. Pluto was at least a loose conjunct to her midheaven, and that could be a career in the occult, which again can include astrology. The fact she died peacefully in her sleep was interesting because I'm looking at some transits in her chart, and at this time she had transit Venus at the very least, a loose conjunction to her natal Neptune. And Venus is about peace. Neptune is about sleep. It's not surprising she did die peacefully in her sleep, being in Leo, something that garnered a lot of attention, notoriety, and recognition. This was obviously a death that was, it came out that which got a lot of exposure. It's also Neptune is in her 10th house in her natal chart. The transit took place in the 10th house of notoriety and recognition and exposure. And the thing is, too, having Neptune in the 10th house is also an indicator for a career through the metaphysical, which can include astrology. And the thing is, and I'm sure she wound up having some fame due to this being in the zodiac sign Leo. Now, as far as Neptune goes, now another thing too is that she also had transit Sun in Libra in the 12th house at the time of her passing. I'm sorry, yeah, the Sun. Well, it's either the Sun. I'm trying to say it. It's either the Sun. Um, Sun may have been actually in late Virgo, but it's interesting that when you're talking about the transit Sun at the time, it's hitting one's 12th house. I've seen this in other charts before of people passing. Remember that the Sun is about life, and the 12th house is about our limitations and is about limitations and restrictions. This could be an indicator of life going away, sadly, of somebody. If there's others, especially if you have other things in the chart that might reaffirm or reinforce or confer this. Now, another thing that I did notice uh, in her chart at this time of her passing, she also had transit Neptune, um, making at least very close to her sixth house cusp, which could be an indicator of the dissolving and dissipation of one's health, and making a loose inconjunct to the ascendant also can reaffirm this. It's also an indicator of something health related. She may have been going through being Neptune. Maybe there was something, Neptune Pisces, something going on with the feet, the toes, the lymphatic system. And another thing that I'm noticing too in her chart as well, as far as a transit goes, she had transit Uranus. Looks like it was approaching her eighth house cusp, and this is when somebody passes. It can be when you have transit Uranus. either in the 8th house or it's closing in on it from the 7th. That could manifest in a very unexpected, very shocking passing. Having Taurus on the 8th house cusp is another indicator of a peaceful and tranquil death, but what it could also indicate that the death may have been involved, maybe in as far as anything physically that may have been going on with her. Might have contributed to her passing. It could have been some thyroid issue or something with the neck or throat area. Another thing too is the fact that her the ruler of the 8th house, which is Venus, is conjunct Mercury. It's not surprising that this was spoken, that this is something that was going to be communicated strongly in the news. The Mercury can be about the news, and this might be talked about very deeply, given that we're talking about Mercury and Scorpio is conjunct by the ruler of the 8th house, which is Venus. Now, and again, also going back to her work as an astrologer, I mean, Venus in Scorpio can obviously be a good placement for making money through the occult, which can include astrology. And also having Mercury in Scorpio in the 2nd house. I mean, Mercury in the 2nd house can be dominated by, the mind being dominated by making money to some degree, but it could also be, when you're talking about Mercury in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio can manifest in communications that are very deep and provocative and profound, and also about ones that can include the supernatural. It can be about astrology as well. And it tells me she was likely very proficient at this, because I mean, you have that Mercury in Scorpio as far as communicating about astrology, and then conjunct Venus. That is also a love for that as well. She probably wrote very well as far as her writing went, as far as matters connected with astrology, and was able to make money from this, having the conjunction, the Venus conjunction now to Mercury. Now, another thing that I noticed in her chart as well, she also had, looking at her chart, she also had Pluto in Cancer. Now, Pluto being in Cancer, I mean, even though it's generational, it can be an indicator of a death in the home. And the thing about this is, now the 4th house is interesting too. She had Capricorn on the cusp of the 4th house in her chart. She is a Sun in Sagittarius, Moon in Sagittarius, and Libra ascendant. And she has Capricorn on the 4th house cusp. Now, Capricorn, it's interesting with her, she has the ruler of that 4th house cusp in the 12th house cusp in her natal chart. Having the ruler of the 4th and the 12th can manifest in the end of life, which would be in solitude and seclusion. And another thing too is that strong 12th house influence. She has Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and the North Node in her 12th house. That's a strong influence on where the metaphysical, which can include astrology, was strongly emphasized, and really being very perhaps balanced in this as well. Given that we're talking about Libra energy, it wouldn't surprise me she was able to do a number of things that were associated with the metaphysical, which includes astrology, but did so in a very balanced manner, in giving a fair amount of time to people in whatever it was, as far as her writings or their chart delineations, whatever it may have been connected with astrology. And Saturn in the 12th house could indicate laborious work in solitude and seclusion, and the Jupiter conjunction to it might have enlarged that energy as well. And also, Jupiter in the 12th house could be very fortuitous for doing things that are 12th house related. Also very good for matters with cooperation and balance and fairness, and just things that are that are very just being fair-minded in doing so. Again, going back to the 12th house, the metaphysical, in the metaphysical, which includes astrology. Now, another thing too, what I'm noticing in her chart as well is that when you look at as far as I'm just trying to see if there's anything as far as transits or natal placements I wanted to get at that might have been anything contributing to her passing. But I'm noticing too, she also had at this time transit Pluto being in the fourth house. And you have transit Pluto hitting the fourth house. The fourth house is again associated with the latter part of life, the end of life. Pluto can obliterate that. If you have that, if somebody has that transiting their fourth house in their natal chart, doesn't mean it's going to happen with everybody that has that transit, but it can increase that propensity for that. Hold on a moment. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, there's really not much more wanted to get at as far as any transits may go, and natal placements that might have been tied in with this. Now, and the thing of just when I'm looking at her, chart, it's obviously, I mean, I thought it was interesting. She was described as eccentric on at least one blog um, that I saw as far as when we're talking about as far as her passing goes. And this is somebody interesting having transit Uranus not far from her 8th house cusp. It's not surprising at the time of her passing and death that there would be a legacy where she could be somewhat eccentric, and I'm sure maybe seen as somebody fairly unorthodox or unusual as well. And what's interesting too is that another thing is that my sun is in Cancer. As far as my synastry with her, my sun in Cancer is conjunct her Pluto in Cancer. It's funny that it's not funny, but just kind of eerie, and it's odd that and interesting that my focus is on her death, and the sun is about our focus in astrology, and Pluto does govern death, of course, and also that transit Uranus in Taurus, that could, in some cases, that could reflect the Taurus astrologers, or Taurus astrologer is also talking about her death in transit. Uranus in Taurus is not far from her 8th house cusp of death. So it's just interesting the way that that pans out. And so anyway, it was really not much more I wanted to get at as far as any transits or natal placements that may have been tied in to her passing. And the only other thing I'm noticing is that transit Jupiter was not far from her 4th house cusp at the time of her death. And Jupiter, I mean, as I've stated in previous videos, could be very, paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. That can enlarge, in this case, it may have enlarged and expanded certain limitations and restrictions at the end or latter part of life. Having Capricorn on the 4th house by itself, it wouldn't surprise me during her end of life, the latter part of life, there may have been some issues with the bones, the knees, the hamstrings, the joints. There may have been some bone deterioration, degeneration. And also having Capricorn on the 4th just simply could mean when one's passing just may be attributed to older age. So really not much more really want to get at or see that I could get at as far as her any transits or natal placements that may have been tied in to her passing. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.